The Vareth Expanse had a reputation that preceded it like a funeral procession. For 347 cycles, the sector had been marked in every navigational database with a cheerful little skull icon and the designation Red Class Extreme, Do Not Approach. This wasn't the kind of warning that overly cautious bureaucrats slapped on regions with slightly elevated radiation or mildly aggressive flora. This was the kind of warning you gave to places where ships went in and screams came out, briefly, before silence reclaimed everything. The problem, as it had been for those 347 cycles, was the Skarrix. Magnificent bastards, the Skarrix. 8 meters of bio-armored nightmare that had evolved in the gas giant Ketris 7's upper atmosphere before deciding that space itself looked like a perfectly reasonable habitat. They hunted in the asteroid fields, nested on the dead moons, and treated passing starships the way a bored house cat treats a laser pointer, except with more dismemberment and hull breaches. Their exoskeletons could withstand direct plasma fire. Their sensory organs could detect engine signatures from 3 astronomical units away. Their temperament made a cornered badger look like a philosophical pacifist. 23 separate species had attempted to clear the Vareth Expanse. 15 of those species still existed. The math wasn't complicated. Velthor Macross, Senior Trade Route Compliance Manager for the Galactic Commerce Collective, had seen the incident reports, thousands of them. He'd reviewed salvage footage that would have given a combat veteran nightmares. He'd attended 4 separate memorial services for survey teams that had thought themselves clever enough to slip through the Expanse undetected. He had, in his 4 decades of service, developed what he considered a healthy respect for the concept of maybe just go around, which was why the document currently displayed on his workstation made him wonder if someone had spiked the water recyclers with hallucinogens. Colonization Application, Draken's Perch, Vareth Expanse, submitted by Terran Colonial Initiative. He read it 3 times. Then he read it again, slower, in case the words decided to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. Krill, he called across the office pod. Krill, come look at this before I report myself for a psychological evaluation. Krill, Karthar, risk assessment officer and the closest thing Velthor had to a friend in this bureaucratic maze, skittered over on 4 of his 6 legs. His eye stalks bent toward the screen, contracted in confusion, then extended fully in what Velthor had learned to recognize as profound alarm. "That's in the Expanse," Krill said flatly. "That's in the Expanse," Velthor confirmed. "The Vareth Expanse. The very same, the one with the Skarrix. Absolutely lousy with them, yes." Krill's manipulator appendages twitched in an agitated pattern. Draken's Perch orbits directly through the primary hunting grounds. The moon crosses 3 separate Skarrix nesting zones in its standard rotation. It's not just in the Expanse, it's in the worst possible location within the Expanse. It's like choosing to build a house inside a volcano that's inside a larger, angrier volcano. Velthor pulled up the application details, skimming through the cheerful boilerplate language that suggested the applicants had somehow missed 3.5 centuries of death statistics. Population estimate 5,000 initial colonists. Primary industries, agriculture, resource extraction, trade hub development. Environmental concerns noted, minimal atmosphere requiring domed habitats, temperature fluctuations, limited water sources. Skarrix concerns noted, none. "They don't mention the Skarrix," Velthor said, his voice climbing an octave. "Not once. There's a section on mineral composition. There's a paragraph about solar radiation. There's a whole page about crop rotation schedules. The apex predator that has terrorized this sector for 3 centuries doesn't rate a single line. Krill was accessing the human file database now, muttering in his native language, which Velthor's translator rendered as a series of increasingly creative profanity. Look at this. 27 official warnings sent to the Terran application board. 27. We sent them the incident reports. We sent them the survival statistics. We sent them high-resolution footage of a Skarrix taking apart a Verith dreadnought like it was unwrapping a gift. They acknowledged receipt of all materials and proceeded with the application anyway. What did they say? Krill pulled up the response. It was 2 sentences long. Thank you for the information. We'll take it under advisement. Velthor stared at those 2 sentences for a long moment, feeling something between awe and existential dread. They're going to die. They're absolutely going to die. Krill agreed. Horribly. Probably quickly, though. The Skarrix are efficient. Should we reject the application? Krill's eye stalk swiveled in the gesture that meant he was accessing legal databases. Can't. They meet all the technical requirements. The sector isn't officially quarantined, just strongly discouraged. If we reject them for danger assessment, they can appeal on the grounds that we allow colonies in other high-risk environments. We'd have to formally quarantine the entire expanse, which would require a council vote, which would require acknowledging that we've left a massive section of space essentially unmanaged for 3 centuries, which makes us look incompetent. So we just let them go die. We stamp the application with a liability waiver so comprehensive it could stop a supernova. We file the appropriate prayer requests with whatever deities accept impossible causes, and we schedule a welfare check in 6 months to count the bodies. Velthor authorized the application with the heaviest hearts he'd had in his career. Somewhere out there, 5,000 humans were about to become a cautionary tale. He just hoped they at least managed to scatter enough remains for a proper investigation. The welfare check came 6 months later, right on schedule. Velthor had volunteered for it himself, partly out of professional obligation and partly out of morbid curiosity. The Transport Council had assigned them a light courier vessel with enhanced shields and a pilot who looked young enough to still believe in luck. Standard approach to Draken's Perch, the pilot announced, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced calm that meant she'd read the same incident reports Velthor had. Scanners are wait. Velthor looked up from his pre-landing checklist. Wait what? I'm getting active signatures, multiple heat sources, structure concentrations. I'm reading gardens. Velthor repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. Krill was already at the scanner station, all 6 limbs working the controls. Confirmed. I'm detecting 17 distinct settlement clusters, agricultural patterns consistent with terraced farming, what appears to be a central market district, and significant infrastructure. I'm also detecting Skarrix in the area. 4 separate signatures within 5 kilometers of the main settlement. Life signs, 3,200 human biosignatures. They're moving around normally. There's no indication of distress or defensive posturing. Some of them are outside. Outside, Velthor said. On a moon in the Vareth Expanse, where the Skarrix are. Yes. Are the Skarrix attacking? Krill's eye stalks did a complete rotation, the equivalent of a violent head shake. The Skarrix are maintaining distance from the settlement perimeter. Wait. No, one's approaching now. I'm reading weapon signatures from the human side, projectile-based chemical propellant. The Skarrix is retreating. The Skarrix is running away. Velthor and Krill looked at each other with the shared expression of people watching reality itself file for bankruptcy. Take us down, Velthor said quietly. I need to see this. The landing pad was well maintained, marked with clear signage in 3 languages including Galactic Standard, and positioned outside the single most baffling structure Velthor had ever encountered. Not a force field, not an energy barrier, not a defensive shield grid. A wall, physical, solid, rising 30 meters high and stretching around the entire visible settlement. It appeared to be constructed from local stone industrial composites, and unless Velthor's eyes were malfunctioning, sections of Skarrix exoskeleton. They're using dead Skarrix as building material, Krill whispered, all 6 legs trembling slightly. A human was approaching the landing pad, waving cheerfully. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what appeared to be casual work clothes, and a smile that suggested he hadn't recently experienced mortal terror. Behind him, the massive gates in the wall stood open, revealing a bustling interior that looked less like a desperate survival outpost and more like a provincial market town that just happened to be surrounded by death. Welcome to Draken's Perch, the human called out, his voice carrying easily across the pad. I'm Jenk Harrow, Settlement Coordinator. You must be the welfare check team. Right on time. Hope you're hungry. Velthor descended the ramp cautiously, Krill close behind. The air smelled wrong. Not the sterile, recycled atmosphere of a struggling colony, but something organic. Cooking food, growing plants, smoke from what might have been wood fires. Mr. Harrow, Velthor began, his translator working overtime to keep his voice level. We're here to assess the colony's status and provide assistance if needed. Given the location and indigenous hazards, we were prepared for a rescue operation. Jenk laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. The Skarrix, yeah, they were a problem for the first couple weeks. We've got it sorted now. Come on, I'll show you around before dinner. We're having steaks. The tour defied everything Velthor understood about colonial survival. Inside the walls, humans moved with relaxed confidence, tending gardens that shouldn't have been possible, operating market stalls selling goods that shouldn't have existed, living lives that should have been terminated by fangs and claws within the first week. Children played in designated recreational areas. Elderly humans sat on benches, enjoying the filtered sunlight. A couple was arguing about produce prices with the passionate intensity of people whose primary concern was vegetable quality. The walls, Krill managed to say. How do they withstand Skarrix attacks? Jenk glanced at the towering barriers with casual pride. 30 meters high, 15 meters thick at the base, tapered to 8 at the top. Foundation goes down another 20 meters, anchored to bedrock. We learned pretty quick that Skarrix are incredible climbers, but terrible at sustained digging. The bone sections aren't just structural, they're psychological. Skarrix aren't exactly smart, but they're smart enough to recognize their own dead. Seems to make them cautious. You hunted Skarrix, Velthor said. It wasn't a question. The evidence was literally built into the architecture. Well, yeah, that's what you do with predators, right? We studied them for the first month, worked out their patterns, figured out their weaknesses. Turns out they're basically space crocodiles with attitude problems. Tough armor, sure, but there are weak points at the joints and underbelly. Their sensory organs are sensitive to certain sonic frequencies, and they're ambush predators, which means they're not great at adapting when prey fights back with coordinated tactics. They passed a large building that smelled distinctly of preserved meat. Through the open doors, Velthor could see what appeared to be a processing facility. Hanging from ceiling hooks were sections of creature that his scanner confirmed were Skarrix remains. Processing center, Jenk explained, following his gaze. We use pretty much everything. Meat's surprisingly decent with the right preparation, though it's tough and you've got to age it properly. The exoskeleton makes excellent construction material and armor plating. The sensory organs contain compounds we're still analyzing, but the medical team thinks they might have pharmaceutical applications. The internal organs. He paused, grinning. Well, that's fertilizer. Best crops we've had in any colony. Krill made a sound like air escaping from a punctured habitat. You're eating them, and wearing them, and building with them, and selling the surplus to cover supply shipments. Jenk gestured to a storefront they were passing, where cured leather goods hung in the window. That tanneries become our second biggest revenue source. Skarrix hide is incredibly durable. We've got orders backed up for the next 8 months. How many have you killed? Velthor asked. His voice barely above a whisper. Jenk pulled out a small datapad, scrolling through figures. As of this morning, 473. We average about 3 per week now, though it was higher in the early days when they were still testing our defenses. We've got hunting parties that go out in rotating shifts, trap lines set up in the outer territories, and a bounty system for problematic individuals. There's a juvenile that's been raiding the eastern farms, got a 50 credit reward on that one. They passed the market district, where humans were indeed selling Skarrix products alongside conventional goods. Meat cuts, leather jackets, bone carvings, processed oils and compounds. One stall was advertising authentic predator steaks, fresh or frozen, with the kind of cheerful salesmanship usually reserved for seasonal produce. You've industrialized them, Krill said. His translator barely able to handle the combination of horror and fascination in his voice. We've established a sustainable resource management system. Jenk corrected with a wink. The population can support a harvest of approximately 150 individuals per year without serious decline. We're currently taking about 120-130. It's conservative, but we're still figuring out their breeding patterns. Velthor stopped walking. You're worried about their population sustainability? Well, yeah, we don't want them going extinct. That'd be ecologically irresponsible. Jenk said this with complete sincerity, as if he wasn't discussing the conservation of the galaxy's most feared predator while standing in a settlement built partially from their bones. A siren wailed, a short burst of sound that made Velthor's heart skip in synchronized panic. Jenk glanced at his datapad with mild irritation. Perimeter alert. Eastern section. Sorry, this'll just take a minute. He tapped a communication device. Hunting Team 3, we've got a visitor at Gate 7, adult by the signature. You're up. Through a gap between buildings, Velthor could see the eastern wall. A Skarrix was indeed approaching, its 8 meters of armored death moving with predatory confidence. 6 humans emerged from a nearby structure, checking weapons with practiced ease. They moved without panic, without fear, with the bored efficiency of workers handling a routine problem. Shouldn't we take cover? Krill asked, already backing toward the nearest building. Nah, they've got it. Watch. The hunting party reached the wall, ascending built-in ladders to firing positions. The Skarrix drew closer, its sensory organs tracking movement within the settlement. Then the humans opened fire, not energy weapons or plasma cannons, but projectile rifles that cracked sharply in the thin atmosphere. The first shots hit the creature's armored sections, making it rear back. The following shots were more precise, targeting joints and sensory clusters. Within 90 seconds, the Skarrix was retreating, leaving a trail of dark ichor. The hunting party descended, consulted briefly, and 3 of them exited through a small sally port to track the wounded creature. They'll finish it off and bring it back for processing, Jenk explained. Probably be back within the hour. We try not to let wounded ones escape. It's more humane, plus waste not, want not. Velthor's translator was struggling with the sounds he was making. They weren't quite words, just the verbal equivalent of system failure. Dinner was served in a communal hall near the settlement center. The space was warm, filled with the sound of conversation and laughter, decorated with what Velthor realized were trophy displays of particularly impressive Skarrix kills. Jenk had secured them a table near the kitchen, where the smells were strongest and most alien. "We're doing steaks tonight," Jenk explained, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. "Skarrix prime cut, aged for 3 weeks. The chef's been experimenting with different preparation methods. This batch is marinated in local herbs and grilled over actual wood fire, Old Earth style." The hunting party that had gone after the wounded Skarrix returned during the appetizer course, dragging their kill through the settlement with cheerful efficiency. A few diners glanced up, nodded approval at the size, and returned to their meals. When the steaks arrived, Velthor stared at his plate with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of the universe had been served medium rare with roasted vegetables. The meat was dark, almost purple, streaked with marbling that caught the light. It smelled good, which was possibly the most disturbing part. "Try it," Jenk encouraged, cutting into his own portion. "I promise it won't kill you." "Probably. We've had 3 other species test it with no adverse effects." Velthor looked at Krill, who had been provided with a nutrient supplement more suitable to his biology. Krill's eye stalks were locked in the position that meant he was watching something he couldn't quite believe. The taste was complex, gamey, slightly sweet, with a texture that was indeed tough, but not unpleasantly so. It was meat. The galaxy's apex predator, the terror of the Vareth Expanse, the creature that had killed thousands and deterred millions, was meat. Edible, palatable, served with a side of roasted tubers and a light sauce. Around them, colonists ate and talked about weather patterns, crop yields, upcoming events, all the mundane concerns of peaceful settlement life. Someone was organizing a festival, someone else was complaining about equipment maintenance. A child at the next table was whining that they wanted dessert before finishing their vegetables. "The trade routes," Velthor said suddenly, his fork stopping halfway to his mouth. "If the Skarrix are manageable, the entire expanse could be reopened." Jenk nodded, swallowing his bite. "That's the plan. We've been documenting everything: safety protocols, hunting techniques, defensive construction methods. Figure if we can make it work here, at the worst location in the sector, then other settlements are absolutely viable. We've already had inquiries from 3 different groups. There's a Pulvari trade consortium that wants to establish a way station on one of the outer moons." "You've turned the death zone into real estate," Krill said faintly. "We've turned an underutilized region into accessible territory," Jenk corrected. "The Skarrix are a challenge, sure, but they're not insurmountable. You just have to approach the situation practically. They're predators. We've been dealing with predators since we were living in caves and throwing rocks at things with bigger teeth. This is just the same concept with better technology and a more robust wall system." Velthor finished his meal in silence, processing implications that seemed to multiply with each bite. The Vareth Expanse, closed for 3.5 centuries, the trade routes that had been forced to navigate around it, adding weeks to journeys, cutting off entire sectors from efficient commerce. The psychological barrier that had made this region synonymous with death. All of it, ending because a species of persistent primates had looked at the galaxy's nightmare and decided it would make acceptable steaks. The return journey to the landing pad took them through the market district again, now lit by bioluminescent fixtures and genuine flame lanterns. The evening market was in full swing, vendors selling their goods, colonists shopping for supplies, everything operating with comfortable normalcy. A street musician was playing something on a stringed instrument, the melody carrying across the settlement with gentle melancholy. "We'll be filing a full report," Velthor said as they reached the ship. "This is unprecedented. The Council will need to reassess the entire sector. We're hoping for regular trade ships within the year," Jenk replied. "We can export Skarrix products, import luxuries, and specialized equipment. This could become a major hub if the routes get re-established. Plus, you know it's nice here. Good community, plenty of space, excellent natural resources once you get past the minor predator issue." Velthor's translator nearly crashed. They lifted off as the settlement's lights came fully alive below them, a constellation of human persistence spreading across what had been written off as permanently hostile territory. Through the viewport, Velthor could see the walls, could trace the boundaries where civilization had planted itself through sheer refusal to acknowledge impossibility. "What do we tell the Council?" Krill asked, his voice small. Velthor thought about his report, about the words he'd need to use to explain what they'd witnessed. The humans had encountered an apex predator and created an industry. They'd faced the sector's greatest threat and developed a recipe book. They'd looked at 347 cycles of failure and said, with the baffling confidence of a species that had apparently never learned the meaning of the word no, that they'd take it under advisement. "We tell them the truth," Velthor said finally. "The Vareth Expanse is open for business. The Skarrix are now a managed resource, and humanity has once again demonstrated that they categorize obstacles as either solutions or ingredients." 3 months later, Velthor found himself passing through the Vareth Expanse on a routine commercial run. Not skirting it, not plotting elaborate courses to avoid it, but passing directly through the sector that had once been marked with skulls and dire warnings. The route saved 11 days off the standard journey. His cargo hold contained legitimate goods from 3 different systems, and his manifest included a scheduled stop at Draken's Perch to pick up a shipment of processed Skarrix hide bound for a fashion manufacturer in the core worlds. The Expanse was developing rapidly. 2 more human settlements had been established on neighboring moons. A Theravian mining operation was setting up on a mineral-rich asteroid, protected by human-designed defensive walls. The Polvari Trade Consortium had broken ground on their way station, advertising safe harbor in the former death zone, with what Velthor had to admit was excellent marketing. The Skarrix population, according to the most recent ecological surveys, was in slight decline but stable. They were learning, in their limited way, that approaching human settlements resulted in violence and death. Some were adapting, becoming more cautious. Others were being hunted, processed, and sold as luxury leather goods across 3 dozen markets. Draken's Perch had expanded beyond its original walls. The settlement now sprawled across a considerable territory, with satellite communities connected by protected roads. The market district had tripled in size. There was talk of establishing a proper spaceport. Someone had opened a restaurant that was gaining interstellar recognition for its fusion cuisine, prominently featuring local ingredients. As Velthor's ship docked at the new commercial facility, he could see advertisement boards promoting authentic Vareth Expanse experiences and guided Skarrix observation tours. A group of Centaurian tourists was disembarking from a passenger shuttle, cameras ready, tour guide explaining the safety protocols with the tone of someone who'd given this speech 100 times. The galaxy's most feared predator had become a tourist attraction. The Vareth Expanse, synonymous with death for 3.5 centuries, was now a destination. And somewhere in the settlement below, humans were probably sitting down to dinner, serving steaks from the creature that had terrorized space lanes for generations, discussing weather and crops, and the price of imported spices with the casual comfort of people who'd simply refused to accept that something was impossible. Verith collected his shipment of Skarrix leather, high quality and properly processed, bound for a manufacturer that would turn it into luxury accessories for the wealthy elite of the core worlds. He authorized payment, updated his manifest, and prepared for departure. Through the viewport, he could see the walls of Draken's Perch, built from stone and bone, and absolute human stubbornness. The universe, Verith decided, had a sense of humor that bordered on cruel. It had spent 3 centuries teaching everyone that the Vareth Expanse was untouchable, that the Skarrix were insurmountable, that some barriers were simply too dangerous to challenge. And then it had introduced humans, who had apparently never received that particular memo. Predator territory, the aliens had called it. The humans had built walls, cooked dinner, and sent out their tax assessments on time. And in doing so, they'd quietly rewritten the rules that everyone else had accepted as immutable truth. As his ship cleared the atmosphere and jumped to FTL, leaving Draken's Perch behind, Verith made a mental note to update his personal philosophy. The galaxy was vast, ancient, and full of wonders. But the real wonder, the thing that defied 347 cycles of accepted wisdom, wasn't the Skarrix themselves. It was the species that looked at them and saw dinner,